Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of the Get Your Flicks Out podcast. I am your host, James Edmundson, and I am joined by the very special guest, me. I have chosen myself as the first guest, and I am sort of co-joined by the ring light that I got from B&M Bargains for just £10. And if you look closely enough, you can almost see the family disappointment. Also, apologies for my awful stool. That really needs replacing, so I'm going to keep that as quiet as possible and not move whatsoever. So, bit of an experiment. I've been wanting to do this for a very long time. Very basic. There's just 10 questions about the films that made me. With one sort of introduction question. So, yeah, this is the video format, which is going to be here on YouTube. There is going to be a audio version as well on Spotify and other places wherever you can get your podcasts from. So, first question I'm usually going to ask people is Saturday night, you're off work, you're in the cinema, what snacks are you getting? Now, for years, I'm a big popcorn fan myself. Large popcorn, large drink. For years, I pledged my allegiance to sweet popcorn, but I sort of, when I started working in the cinema, sort of defected to salt, and it sort of changed my life in a kind of way. Big fan of salt popcorn, but the mix is very nice every now and again. But last time I went to a cinema, the last film I saw in a cinema would have been Wonder Woman 84, and I saw it at the Warrington Odeon, and I got some sweet popcorn and no disrespect to Warrington Odeon. I'm not sure if they'd replaced their stock since the last time cinemas were open back in the summer, and it tasted like shit. So maybe next time, gonna jump back onto the salt side of things. So large salt popcorn. Drink-wise, I normally get a sort of Fanta or a sort of orangey drink, so a Tango or a Fanta, which I normally wouldn't drink in my social life. Let's go to the pub and drink a Fanta. I normally only drink a sort of orangey full-fat drink with a meal, if you can count a large salt popcorn as a meal. So yeah, large salt popcorn, orangey for drink, Fanta, Tango, whatever. If I feel a little bit naughty, maybe a small Ben & Jerry's. So that's my ideal cinema go-to snacks. No nachos, too loud, too messy. Sorry, I know people get proper wet for nachos, but it ain't for me. So, the 10 questions, like I said, this is going to be so much smoother with a guest, by the way. This is really awkward. I've not scripted any of this. So, what was the first film that I remember watching? I'm sure that I had a wide variation of VHSs when I was growing up. Some that spring to mind would be Pinocchio, Sword and Stone, some classic Disney films, but the film I sort of relatively vividly remember watching in the cinema would be the 1996 live-action remake of 101 Dalmatians, which people seem to forget about. It seems to be completely forgotten about in time, and it's kind of sad, really, because that sort of kickstarted this trend of live-action Disney remakes that we've gotten over the years, albeit there was quite a gap between 101 Dalmatians and then, what would have been the first one? Cinderella, maybe? Not too sure. But they've been a relatively mixed bag since. But I would have been 3 years old when that film came out, and Glenn Close as Cruella de Vil used to scare the shit out of me. There's a scene in that film, and I'll put a clip on here, in the film where she sort of falls into this mud bath. She's in like a farmhouse or barn, and she falls into this sort of barrel of mud and pig shit, and she sort of emerges from it and is covered in like hay and just shit, and it used to absolutely terrify me. And yeah, what a horrible film. And I've never really revisited since. Maybe I'm so traumatized by it, I'm not too sure. But yeah, we're getting a sort of prequel to that starring Emma Stone. which I find quite unusual that you're going to make a sort of villain-focused film about a woman. You know, we're supposed to sympathise with her actions later down the line, but at the end of the day, this is a woman that skins dogs. So whether I can sympathise with a woman who does that, I'm not too sure. But, you know, Emma Stone, I'll watch anything with her in it. But yeah, 101 Dalmatians, pretty overlooked animated film as well from the 1960s, one of the sort of earlier Disney films. But yeah, fuck Glenn Close, and fuck Glenn Close covered in mud and pig shit, and hey. The last film I saw, doesn't necessarily have to be in a cinema, just the last film that you saw in general. I'm currently making my way through my letterboxd watch list, which at the moment has around 300 films on it. They're completely random, no specific order, and the last film I watched a couple of nights ago is a film from 2004 called Enduring Love, which stars Daniel Craig, Rhys Ifans, Samantha Morton, also some very minor roles for a very fresh-faced Ben Whishaw and Andrew Lincoln in the film as well. And it sort of tells the story of a couple who are having a romantic picnic in a field, and then all of a sudden a hot air balloon crashes in the field, and then strangers sort of emerge themselves in trying to rescue the people in the air balloon. It ends in a tragedy. So, good concept on paper. It follows the aftermath of this hot air balloon accident, but it never really knows what it wants to be. It sort of flickers between themes. It sort of starts as a film that deals with things such as survivor's guilt, regret, constantly thinking if he could have saved the person who died in this accident. That's when the film's at its best, but then completely out of nowhere, it also has this stalker thriller element where Rhys Ifans' character sort of stalks Daniel Craig, and he feels like there is some sort of special bond between them, and that this accident sort of brought them together through fate, and that, I mean, the hint is in the title of the film, and it also delves into themes such as what is love? Is it a biological thing? Is it a some kind of force? And you have sort of clashing ideologies between Daniel Craig, who thinks it is just science and feelings in our brain, and then you have Rhys Ifans' character who believes it is sort of a force by God, a force of nature. So clashing ideologies sounds interesting. It's absolutely awful. Not that it's awful, that's being a bit too harsh. The camera work is very shoddy, a lot of handheld work in it. But yeah, it's sort of tones clash. It never really knows what it wants to be. It wants to be a psychological thriller, but then it also wants to delve deep into these sort of philosophical themes, and it never really hits the mark with it. I gave it 2 stars. Yeah, so that was the last film I watched, so a little bit disappointing. Sorry that I couldn't give you anything a bit more exciting. Question 3 is the film that scared me the most. Not necessarily someone who gets scared unless it's Cruella de Vil, when I'm a 3-year-old young man, but as an adult, I feel horror films, they don't really trigger anything in me. I think horror films can be very, very lackluster, especially modern day horror. They sort of, oh my goodness gracious, just burped, I do apologise. Yeah, modern horror films, they sort of prioritise jump scares with sort of no-name actors. You can make them on a relatively short budget. They'll always make profit, and you just get sort of films just shitted out. Some of the worst films I've ever seen have probably been horror films. But there have been a few that sort of really frightened me, and one that frightens me the most, I've seen it around 5 or 6 times at this point, is Sinister from 2012, I believe. I didn't really know much about it going into it, so I would have been relatively young when I saw that. I would have been around 17 years old. Stars Ethan Hawke, relatively low budget film again. It is directed by Scott Derrickson, who I believe went on to make Doctor Strange. Yeah, it stars Ethan Hawke as this sort of failed real crime writer who moves into the house of a recently murdered family. And he knows that the family have been murdered. He doesn't tell his family; they're completely unaware of it, and he finds these sort of Super 8 tapes in his attic, and watches these tapes overnight. And these tapes feature they're snuff films, spanning over decades, and there have been previous murders. And just thinking about it gives me the willies. But yeah, every time Ethan Hawke's put one of these tapes on, the use of music in this is absolutely horrifying. There's a scene. I won't get into too many spoilers. Where Ethan Hawke finds this tape labeled "Family Barbecue," which features a family being burned alive in a car, and you're watching it all happen, and the music that plays during this sequence is absolutely horrible, and I sort of have to sort of wince away every time it comes on. I'm not necessarily someone who's scared of violence in films. It's just there's very subtle use of the music, and there's a lot of very subtle horror used in the film. Sort of, pictures coming to life in the background without the main character seeing it, stuff like that, and it really gets me every time I watch it. It does sort of nosedive towards the end because it starts introducing supernatural elements, which a lot of people argue takes away from it, in as a whole. But it's a film I love. It's probably my favourite ever horror film, and I think it sort of slipped under the radar a bit. I only know a select handful of people who've ever really seen it. I know 2 people who say it's the scariest film they've ever seen. So yeah, Sinister from 2012. If you haven't seen it, really check it out if you're brave enough. So yeah, it's a great horror film, but also has an element of a whodunit sort of aspect to it. But yeah, the some of the best use of music I think I've ever seen in a horror film. So yeah, I'd highly recommend you check that out. If you're brave enough. Now, the film that made me cry the most, this was very difficult for me to answer. I'm not someone who cries at films, especially I sort of certainly get a lump in my throat the older I've got. But growing up, no, I think there's probably I can count on one hand films that have made me cry. There's never been a film that's ever made me like weep. But the first film that ever made me cry was actually Gladiator. With Russell Crowe, and it's spoilers for Gladiator. I mean, it's a 20-year-old film. He dies at the end, and he sort of sees himself in heaven, going seeing his deceased family or whatever. And I rewatched that film about 4 years ago, and I think it's criminally overrated. I think it's a product of its time. I think there was a sort of resurgence in epic films, especially Ridley Scott made Kingdom of Heaven not too long after Gladiator, and I think it's a really cheesy film. It's very well acted. You've got Russell Crowe, Peter Reid, that's it. Oliver Reed, Peter Reid, the former Everton and Bolton Wanderers midfielder. No, Oliver Reed in his final ever role. Joaquin Phoenix, some of the greatest actors on the planet, really. But yeah, it's really cheesy, and it's not really a film that would make me cry ever again. So I'm gonna go with the incredibly boring answer and say Schindler's List. Very harrowing film. Not too sure why I own the Blu-ray for this. My mum actually got me that one year. But it's not really a film where it's a rainy Sunday and you think, oh, do you know what I could really do with watching? Let's watch Schindler's List in 1080p Blu-ray. Yeah, 3.5 hours of the Holocaust. Yeah, that'll get the juices flowing. Yeah, so it's a film that I don't think a lot of, a lot of people have seen it, but a film that a lot of people who haven't seen it, and the reason they haven't seen it sort of shy away from it because it's a heavy subject, and not for the faint of hearted whatsoever. But it's a very important film, and to think that atrocities like that happened in the grand scheme of things not that long ago. It happened in our grandparents' lifetime, and it's so important. And yeah, you need a heart of stone. If you don't cry at that, you're not human. But it sort of got there are certain comedic elements to it. I believe, like from it's quite a while ago since I saw it, about 3.5 years ago. But Ben Kingsley's character sort of acts as a very slight comic relief character. Well, I mean, he's not gonna be, you're not gonna be side splitting, but yeah. So it's just an incredible film with incredible performances, and shout out to Liam Neeson, who sort of doesn't really do dramatic roles anymore, and is instead just stars as ex-SAS man who batters Eastern European men in revenge thrillers. And it's a sort of shame, really, because when you watch something like Schindler's List, you see what a great actor he really is, still is. I mean, if he's dedicated to battering Eastern Europeans, then fine by me. He's one of the best at it. In films, not in real life. I don't know what he really gets up to in real life, but yeah, Schindler's List, really boring. Special mention, Hacksaw Ridge, another war film. Well, I wouldn't really say Schindler's List is a war film, but Hacksaw Ridge, incredible story, incredibly overlooked, really, in war films. Incredibly directed by Mel Gibson. I mean, Mel Gibson is what a terrible human being, but my God, you put that guy behind a camera, he can direct the shit out of a film. Yeah, an incredible story about a conscientious objector during the Second World War, a man who wanted to go to war but completely refused to hold a firearm and just wanted to go and save lives as a medic. And it stars Andrew Garfield as the main character, and it's a prominently Australian cast. Sam Worthington, I think, is in it. Hugo Weaving. Yeah, some great Australian talent in it, as Mel Gibson himself being Australian, but co-stars Vince Vaughn and Andrew Garfield, who I think are the only non-Australians in the film. But yeah, Hacksaw Ridge, about a man who went to war without a gun and just his sole goal was to help people. That really got to me. And another special mention would be Logan. I've got a poster of which right in front of me. My favourite comic book film, I think. Probably tied with Watchmen and The Dark Knight, but The Dark Knight's always the boring answer. I actually think Hugh Jackman as Wolverine is probably one of the most unrecastable roles in film. And having grown up with him as Wolverine I would have been, 7 years old when the first X-Men film came out? And the way that film ends, it felt like I was watching a family member just sort of pass away in front of me. That really got to me. So yeah, so I'd say Schindler's List made me cry the most, but honourable mentions for Hacksaw Ridge and Logan. So a couple of my favourite questions coming up. First one, we'll say a film that everyone dislikes, but you like personally. So maybe a guilty pleasure sort of film. It's very easy to pick a film like Batman and Robin or The Room, but they're very entertaining films. As bad as they are, they have their own cult followings. And I sort of picked this at the last minute, and I know it has its fans, but has a terrible sort of Rotten Tomatoes score, and was critically annihilated by critics and audiences. But I have a big soft spot for it, and that is Van Helsing, starring Hugh Jackman again and Kate Beckinsale. If you don't know what this is, this was it's Universal, isn't it? Yeah. So, yeah, Universal obviously owned the rights to all those sort of classic monster movies like The Wolfman, The Invisible Man, Dracula. And throughout time, there's been sort of attempts to sort of revitalise those films and remake them. We recently saw the Mummy remade to atrocious feedback. I've not seen it myself, but then we've seen the good side of it in The Invisible Man by Lee Winnell. But yeah, this is from 2004, and it is a sort of gothic action adventure film with Hugh Jackman, who stars as the character of Van Helsing from the Dracula novel, and he's sort of retold as he's this sort of monster hunter, and he goes up against Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Dracula the Wolfman, Frankenstein's monster. And do you know what? I fucking love it. I've not seen it in quite a long time. I think it's cool. I think there's nothing cooler than a guy in like a big leather trench coat with like crossbows and just slaying demons. I think that's so like badass. I don't understand the sort of hatred it gets. Is it silly? Yeah. Is it fun as hell? Yeah. And it also garnered a very, very good and overlooked video game tie-in on the PS2 and original Xbox. It's sort of a Devil May Cry rip-off. But yeah, I'd highly recommend that you check out the video game tie-in. But yeah, Van Helsing fucking rocks, man. Like, I don't really care. I probably could have picked something out else, but that was the one that sprung to mind first, really. Big shout out to to some of the Punisher movies, especially the 1989 Dolph Lundgren one, which I don't think I've met another person who's ever seen it. In fact, I am going to do a video on that film one day. And the second live action Punisher film with Thomas Jane, I think that has like a Rotten Tomatoes score of like 28%, and I don't get it. It's a film that the critics hated. I just don't get it. But I was also going to pick Daredevil as well, the Ben Affleck Daredevil film, but I think it sort of has enough fans. I think that film is silly in parts, but it's fine. But yeah, Van Helsing. Fucking, yeah, love Van Helsing. And the controversial question, a film in retrospect to the previous question, a film that everybody loves, but you dislike. I was spoilt for choice for this one. Most recently, Don't Hate Me. Parasite, I think, is a film I need to check out again. I watched it after the hype of the Oscars. Didn't really get on board with it. You know, I remember people coming up to me saying, "Oh, you'll never see anything like it. You won't believe the ending, and you won't believe the twists." And you know, there's a family living under the fucking basement. You know, it's not exactly the ending of The Sixth Sense, is it? But that's not my answer. My answer is, and Mark, the bass player from my band, I know this is your favourite ever film, and if you're watching, I'm so sorry, but it's The Exorcist. It's a film that I shied away from watching for years and years and years. A film that my mum says is the most terrifying film ever made. She obviously watched it at the time, and I'm aware of its cultural impact. I'm aware that at the time it was probably this horrible thing. No one had ever seen anything quite like it. But I watched it a couple of years ago. I think I even watched it on Halloween as well, in a dark room to sort of set the scene. Didn't like it. Don't like it. I watched the director's cut. I'm not sure what people's opinions are. I'm not sure, you know, what people like more, the director's cut or the theatrical cut. Yeah, and by the way, this is a very controversial film. I think it took something like 15 years for it to even get released on home video in the UK. Released in the sort of early to mid 70s and wasn't released in the UK, home released, until the 90s. But yeah, I think it's boring. I think it's overly long. I thought about going into it, my expectation was that it was just a film about a girl possessed by the devil or some form of demonic force, and it's just priests trying to get this devil out of her. I thought it was going to be this really contained film. It's not that. It's not that whatsoever. It's a film about crisis of faith, you know, losing your faith in God. And yeah, is it, for the time, was it controversial? Yeah, I mean, it features a young girl diddling herself with a crucifix, saying all sorts of horrible things about Jesus. So yeah, obviously I can understand for the time, but compared to today's standards, it's not really something that really gripped me, and I really didn't like it. It really bored me. And you know, it's easy to pick a film like Batman or Robin where it's silly and ridiculous, but I'd rather watch Batman and Robin than The Exorcist ever again, if I'm honest. So yeah, sorry, Mark. Maybe might give it another whirl one day. I'm not too sure, but yeah, sorry, mate. Well, we're sticking with the negative. Worst film I've ever seen. Easiest question on the list. Now, it's probably going to be controversial because, again, when you think of terrible films, you go back to something like The Room, or again, I keep bringing it up, Batman and Robin. It's just you think of the worst films, they're always the ones that spring to mind first. But I'm going with a recent film, and I am going with it's. I'm going to sound like such a sort of pretentious, oh, cinema's dead kind of guy here, but I'm going with the 2019 live action remake of The Lion King, um, because you know the idea of a remake is to sort of bring your own sort of spin on it. Didn't do that first and foremost. It's essentially a shot for shot remake, but still somehow manages to be half an hour longer than the original. You also got to factor the account that you are remaking one of the, objectively, in my opinion, the greatest animated film ever made with, you know, with one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, Academy Award winning soundtrack by Elton John. Some really great underappreciated voice acting in that film. Jeremy Irons, Matthew Broderick, Rowan Atkinson, Whoopi Goldberg, and of course James Earl Jones as Mufasa. But when this film was announced, I was sort of skeptical about it. So not spectacle. I wasn't a pair of glasses. I was sort of skeptical about it. But then I saw the casting, and I thought, whoa, this could really be something. Donald Glover, Beyonce, Seth Rogen, Billy Eichner as Timon and Pumbaa, bringing back James Earl Jones because, of course, like you just have to. And then it came out, and I was disappointed, underwhelmed, because it's a completely soulless film. That film exists for one reason and one reason only. That is to make money, and envisions everything really wrong with cinema today. So yeah, the none of the voice casts sound like they want to be there. Timon and Pumbaa, I would say, are the sort of shining lights of the film. Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner both sound like they're having a decent enough time. But the voice acting, my God, like everyone just sounds so disinterested and sort of really disappointing. And I can never pronounce his name, but the guy who voices Scar in the film, Chiwetel Ejiofor, I think. Sorry if I butchered his name. Scar, I mean, he can bring a really sinister aspect to the character of Scar, and my favourite song in The Lion King is the one that Scar sings, Be Prepared, and they sort of watered it down to make it more sinister, and it just didn't really work. And it sounds horrible to the visual effects team, who did an incredible job. Yeah, it looks photorealistic, but that also takes any sort of emotion for the characters. Also took out some of the most important aspects of the original, because it deals with themes such as overcoming grief and stuff. And the new one didn't do that. Like in the original, when Rafiki hits Simba with the stick, and Simba's like, that hurt. And then Rafiki is like, it doesn't matter, it's in the past. Probably a bit racist doing that voice, but yeah, it's that isn't in the film. That's a very important aspect, because Simba, sees his own dad die. Spoilers. It sends him in this slump for years and years and years, and then Rafiki gives him this message, and he's like, holy shit, I can do this. I'll go back to Pride Rock and beat the shit out of my uncle, feed him to hyenas. Pretty dark, really, when you think it's a kid's film. But yeah, that just wasn't really in the film, and just a soulless, empty piece of garbage. And the fact that Jon Favreau could take credit for a screenplay, for a shot-for-shot remake, is quite embarrassing, in my opinion. But it made over $1 billion. My opinion isn't going to change anyone's mind to go and watch them. They're going to remake all the other Disney films, and they're probably all going to be shit as well. So, yeah, that's the worst. It's the worst film I've ever seen. I can't. My only positive is that it looks good, but you could sort of counter argue and say, but that takes away any sort of emotion from the characters. And Timon and Pumbaa sound like they're having a good time. Sorry. Back on a positive note, what's the best animated film? Well, what's your favourite animated film? Lion King was close. Incredibles came close. Finding Dory came close. Inside Out came very, very close. But nothing compares to Hercules. Love it. Probably Probably one of the first Disney films I saw in the cinema, apart from 101 animated Disney films, at least. Yeah, and you know what? I think when people talk about the best Disney films, it's never really brought into conversation. It's very popular amongst people around the same age group as me. There are at least three other people that agree with me, but everything about it, my God, I'm a big fanboy of Greek mythology, first and foremost. But the songs, oh my days, the songs you've got, the song that Meg sings, I Won't Say I'm in Love. You can catch me singing that in the shower in my car. What a fucking banger, mate. Just, you've got the epic Michael Bolton, I Can Go the Distance song. My God, what a film. And yeah, pretty overlooked. I think the voice acting, you've got Danny DeVito as Phil and James Wood as James Woods, sorry, as Hades, who loved playing the role. He reprised the role many, many times in the Kingdom Hearts games, even the ones that no one understands or likes. But, he just loves playing that character so much. He's even said himself that any opportunity he gets to reprise that role, he comes back and does it, even like 25 years after the film came out. But yeah, Hercules, and I'm going to say it right now, the best Disney princess. And Meg is the reason I am in the kind of girls I'm into today. Just this stoic, miserable bitch. Spit in my mouth, mummy. So, 2 questions left. Objectively, what is the best film ever made? Not necessarily your favourite, just objectively. Sorry, there's a bit of dust there. I was going to say Schindler's List for this. Then I sort of changed my mind. I was going to be really, really boring and say the Shawshank Redemption, but I didn't really want to sell out and say the IMDb top film. So I'm going to go for a black and white film. Yeah, I know, right? 1950s black and white film at that. And a film that I only saw for the first time very recently, and that would be 12 Angry Men. My opinion, one of the most important films ever made. The fact that this came out at the time it did and deals with the themes it does, such as racism, standing up to bullies, toxic masculinity. If you're completely unaware of the concept of 12 Angry Men, it's quite simply a all-white male jury who are on trial, the jury for a trial of I believe he's a young Italian man who's on trial for murder. And you have these 12 guys who, during the deliberation of the between the jury, 11 of them sort of just want to get out. It's the hottest day of the year. One of them has tickets to a baseball game, and then you have the main character played by Henry Fonda, who's like, wait, we should sort of sort this out. This is someone's life we're dealing with here. And then again, it deals with, you have a race. There is a racist member of this jury, and there's a scene in which they sort of force him aside and make him face the wall. And this came out in the 50s, and there's a scene in which the last guy to break and sort of maybe conjure up the idea that this guy is innocent. He's so adamant that he doesn't want to be seen as weak. He doesn't want his mind to be changed. And the scene, it's one of the final scenes of the film where he sort of just breaks down, is, dealing with that sort of idea of masculinity. And, it's okay to sort of cry. And fuck me, this film came out in like the 1950s and it was dealing with themes like that. And, my God, what a film. And it's a must watch. It's a must watch. And again, I only saw it for the first time about 6 to 12 months ago. You need to watch it. Don't be put off by the idea of it being in black and white. It's just, you can look past that because it's well acted, it's well written, it's a contained film, it never leaves the room except right at the end. Watch Schindler's List. Jesus Christ, what a film. Oh my God, 12 Angry Men. Still thinking about the Holocaust. So, final question, 12 Angry Men. Please watch 12 Angry Men, please. So, the final question. Your favourite film. Or, in this case, my favourite film. I've got the Steelbook here, so it might look a bit weird. It's 500 Days of Summer. It's the film that sort of reignited my love of film, because when I was younger, I sort of was always interested in film. Of course I was, but I also went through this phase of watching films that were probably a bit too mature for me. I remember watching Blade Runner at like 13 and being like, what? Fight Club was another film. I was like, yeah, this is good, but I'm only saying it's good because everyone else says it's good. And I sort of went off film, and I remember being in Blockbuster one day, RIP, and it was like rent 3 DVDs for a tenner, and I remember being in there for about 40 minutes just trying to pick a film, and there it was, right at the bottom of the shelf. And I used to read Empire magazine at the time, and I remember thinking, oh, I've heard this. I've heard of this film. It's I think Empire gave it 4 stars or something. I'll check it out. And my God, it made me the man I am today. I think it's the greatest sort of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a coming of age film. I think it's not a coming of age film where it's a teenager transitioning into adulthood. It's sort of a coming of age. It's a coming of age romance of adulthood romance, not teen romance. If you've never seen it, it stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Zooey Deschanel. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is this sort of happy-go-lucky greeting card writer who wants to find the one, and he believes he finds the one in Zooey Deschanel's character called Summer. She is someone who doesn't believe in love, and then the film sort of goes through the 500-day relationship between them both in non-linear fashion, and it is a great depiction of everything wrong with modern day relationships. It's this film is what, 12 years old now, and the romance today is still depicted perfectly as it is in this film. You have, these people are doing what couples do. They're holding hands in IKEA. They're sleeping with one another. And, you could argue and it brings up this argument of, well, she told him from the start she didn't want anything serious, but then you could argue he told her that he liked her, he loved her, and she carried it on. So it brings up this argument of who's at fault. Personally, I think Tom's at fault. He has this, he creates this idea of them being together in his head, even though she tells him time and time and time and time again that it's not meant to be. And yeah, it's my favourite ever film. Don't worry, it has a relatively happy ending. Great soundtrack, great performances. The scene in which, in fact, no, I wouldn't really consider it a spoiler because I've already said it, but there's this scene when they sleep together for the first time, and then it cuts to the morning after. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is walking down the street. You Make My Dreams Come True by Hall & Oates plays, and he's sort of dancing to it. There's this big dance routine. And it's pretty relatable, when you have that sort of physical connection with someone, and you feel like dancing, and you actually physically see it happening, and then all of it to be sort of dashed away from him. It's heartbreaking. It's funny. Great soundtrack. Great performances. A must watch. Yeah, my favourite ever film. 500 Days of Summer. Few people I know haven't really seen it or can't really jump on board with it. But if you've ever been through one of those sort of turmoil relationships where maybe one person didn't like you back and you loved them and they didn't really see it the same way, I think it's a great watch. It's a great comfort movie of mine. So yeah, that's my favourite ever film. So we've been going for just under 40 minutes, and that's the questions. If you've got any ideas for other questions, let me know. If you want to appear on the podcast, please let me know. I've only got about 3 people that have agreed to do it so far, but yeah, thank you very much for watching this or listening to it wherever you are. There will be a review of Mortal Kombat coming this weekend. I'm not sure if I'm going to have time to see it on the day of release on Friday. And I know I keep reiterating it, but I promise I am going to be reviewing games soon. It's just the case of them coming out. So yeah, Resident Evil 8 will be the first major video game review, sorry, and The Hunt for the Worst, which I mentioned in my first YouTube video, which is a series in which I hunt to find the worst video game I've made. Currently in the works. I just need to create an intro for the whole segment. But yeah, that's what's coming up. Thank you very much. Like, subscribe, all that cringy shit I don't like saying, which I've said before. But yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.